Hello again. Since the Macpherson report into the events surrounding the death of Stephen Lawrence some years ago introduced the concept of institutional racism to the general public, it has eagerly been seized upon to explain a host of things. A disproportionately high number of black people in prison? That would be institutional racism on the part of the police and judicial system. Disproportionately low numbers of students at Oxford University who are black? That must be institutional racism at work in the educational system. Black people earning less on average than white people? Institutional racism. Hardly any black dentists, opticians, architects, bricklayers or shopkeepers? Guess what? It's institutional racism at work again. Institutional racism on the part of white people is one explanation which is advanced for what is seen. Another is cultural differences. Perhaps black people simply don't have a tradition of being shopkeepers or opticians, and so these are not livelihoods which appeal to them. Scientific racists, known sometimes as race realists, claim that some inherent biological differences account for what is seen. Institutional racism, though, remains by far and away the most popular way of accounting for all this, which is why we see all those initiatives aimed at increasing diversity and so on in various fields. It is, as you might say, the default setting when thinking about such matters. This is odd because it takes quite literally less than a minute to see why this is not a good and sufficient explanation for what is observed. We need only consider the nature of white racists. There are certainly white people who feel that their own ethnicity is superior to all others. They regard those with darker skins as somehow inferior, and at best dislike them, and at worst they hate them. Such men and women would certainly thwart efforts by those belonging to an ethnic minority to rise and become professionals in any field. They brook no rivals. This kind of prejudice, though, does not distinguish between Indians and Pakistanis, between Caribbeans and Africans, Chinese people and those whose heritage lie in Australia. White racists are not as sophisticated as that. If such people were indeed in control of our society, then I can readily believe that they would operate an informal colour bar and do their best to prevent Indians and Africans from becoming middle-class professionals or getting to the best universities. This is not what happens, though. We all know that there are any number of Indian dentists and opticians, although very few, by the way, whose ancestry lies in sub-Saharan Africa on the islands of the Caribbean. We know, too, that Oxford University is full of Indians and Chinese people, but hardly any from the Caribbean. We also know that although people from Indian Hindu families or Chinese ones have no difficulty in becoming opticians, those from Pakistani families are as unlikely to do so as those whose heritage lies in Jamaica or Barbados. For this reason alone, it's perfectly obvious that racial prejudice on the part of white people is not the key to understanding what is going on. Few white people, even those who are not prejudiced against people of colour, take the trouble to distinguish between, say, Igbos and Yoruba, nor do they just lump them all together as Nigerians or Africans, nor do they trouble themselves with the difference between Seletis and Gujaratis. When we see various ethnic groups flourishing and becoming well-to-do professionals, while others languish and do worse than the average white British person, we cannot therefore simply invoke racism to explain the situation. When we observe that Hindus have, on average, higher incomes in Britain than white people, while Sileti Muslims have lower incomes, then it is obvious that racism is not at work. How many white people, even the most liberal and progressive, would ever know the difference between Siletis and Gujaratis? Whatever is happening is not a product of white society, but of something much deeper. The concept of institutional racism is hopelessly discredited, woefully inadequate to explain all this. But many left-wing people cling to it desperately because without it, they might have to start thinking about what is really causing the differing levels of achievements in our society between various ethnic groups.